Jake never liked books. Not in English, not in his native language. He thought stories were for people who had time to waste. He preferred things that moved fast. Games, memes, short videos. But that all changed one rainy afternoon when his best friend Ryan threw down a challenge that would quietly flip Jake's world upside down. They were sitting in their usual spot, the corner of a noisy coffee shop that smelled like burned espresso and ambition. Ryan leaned forward with that smirk he always wore when he was about to make trouble. $50, he said. You read one English book a week for 3 months. Jake laughed. Yeah, right. $50 isn't worth dying of boredom. So you're scared? Ryan teased, tilting his head. That word, scared, hit Jake in a way he didn't expect. He wasn't scared. He just didn't believe reading could change anything. But he hated losing a bet more than anything. Fine, Jake said. You're on. But when I win, you're buying me dinner for a week. Ryan grinned, shook his hand, and the deal was sealed. The next morning, Jake walked into the local library for the first time in years. The place felt ancient, the kind of quiet that made you whisper even when no one was around. Rows and rows of books stretched like soldiers standing in attention. He wandered between the shelves, half regretting his decision, half curious about what kind of torture he'd signed up for. He grabbed the first English book he recognized, The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. The cover looked harmless enough. A shepherd, a desert, something about dreams. Easy, he thought. He checked it out, shoved it into his backpack, and went home. That night, he opened the book with the enthusiasm of someone starting a diet on New Year's Day. The first pages were fine. Then came the hard part, words he didn't understand, phrases that made no sense, sentences that seemed to stretch forever. He wanted to quit after 15 minutes. He could have Googled the summary, faked it, and still won the bet. But something stopped him. Maybe pride, maybe the way the words personal legend kept repeating in the story. He didn't know exactly what it meant, but it sounded powerful. Like destiny wrapped in mystery. So he pushed through. Each night he read a little more. Sometimes just a few pages, sometimes a whole chapter. He underlined words he didn't know, wrote them down in a notebook, and looked them up later. Slowly, the sentences began to make sense. The story wasn't about sheep or deserts anymore. It was about searching, not for treasure, but for purpose. And that hit him harder than he expected. By the end of week 1, Jake wasn't just reading. He was thinking in English. He caught himself muttering phrases from the book while brushing his teeth. He started recognizing words from movies and songs he'd heard 100 times but never truly understood. It felt like discovering hidden meanings in a world he thought he already knew. Still, it wasn't easy. There were nights he stared at the same paragraph for 10 minutes, frustrated, feeling stupid. But every time he wanted to quit, he remembered Ryan's smirk, that word, scared. He wasn't going to let that define him. Not now. On the last night of the first week, Jake finished The Alchemist. He closed the book slowly, staring at the final sentence. When you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it. He didn't know if the universe cared about him, but for the first time, he felt like it might. The next day, he walked into the library again. The librarian, an older woman with glasses that made her look like she could read minds, smiled at him. "Back already?" she asked. "Yeah," Jake said. "I need another challenge." She handed him The Hunger Games. "This one's faster," she said, "but not easier." Jake smirked. "Good," he replied. "I'm not scared." As he walked out of the library, rain started to fall again, the same as the day the bet began. But this time, it didn't feel gloomy. It felt like the world was washing away something old, making room for something new. He didn't know it yet, but that simple bet, that silly challenge over $50, had just become the spark that would ignite a lifelong passion. Because sometimes, learning a language doesn't start in a classroom. It starts with curiosity, a little pride, and a book you didn't expect to love. Week 2 began with confidence and caffeine. Jake felt like he had cracked some secret code. He walked into the library with a swagger, grabbed the Hunger Games, and thought, "I got this." But within the first 20 pages, the walls came crashing down. The sentences were faster, sharper, filled with slang and emotion that made his brain trip over itself. Katniss wasn't talking like a character in a fable. She was talking like a real person, and that made everything harder. He reread the same lines 5, 6 times. He circled words like tribute, mockingjay, reaping, and his notebook was already a battlefield of translations. He spent hours trying to understand just one chapter. The story moved like a train, but Jake felt like he was chasing it on foot. Still, something strange was happening. He wasn't angry about it. He was hooked. He wanted to understand. He wanted to know who would survive. And every time he learned a new word, he felt like he'd just won a small fight. One night, frustrated, he switched to the audiobook version. Listening to the narrator's voice, he started reading aloud with her, matching tone and rhythm. It was awkward, his accent heavy, his pronunciation unsure, but when he looked in the mirror and repeated the lines, something in him shifted. The English didn't sound foreign anymore. It sounded alive, as if it was waiting for him to claim it. That became his new ritual. Every night, an hour of reading aloud. His parents thought he was crazy, talking to imaginary people in his room. But Jake didn't care. He was building something. Fluency, confidence, maybe even a new identity. The bet had stopped being about $50. It had become personal. By week 3, he started noticing changes outside the pages too. He was catching phrases in movies without subtitles. He could reply to memes in English and actually make people laugh. He even caught himself thinking in English sometimes. Not translating, just thinking. It was weirdly satisfying, like his brain was rewiring itself. But progress came with frustration. There were nights he slammed the book shut, convinced he'd never sound natural. "Why can't I just learn faster?" he shouted once, his voice echoing through the empty room. The next morning, tired but stubborn, he opened the book again. He read through the tears of exhaustion and doubt, one sentence at a time. And that's when he found it, a moment in the Hunger Games where Katniss says, "I am not afraid." It hit him like a punch. That's exactly how he wanted to feel. Fearless, no matter how lost he was in the words. He wrote the quote on a sticky note and stuck it to his mirror. Every morning he read it out loud. "I am not afraid." It became his mantra. Soon, the library visits became a habit. The librarian started saving books for him, faster ones, deeper ones, stories that demanded more from him. She told him, "If you can survive this one, you'll understand any English you ever hear." He grinned. Then bring it on. By the end of week 3, Jake was no longer just reading books. He was living them. He had conversations in English with himself, debated fictional characters out loud, even wrote short summaries to test if he understood everything. And slowly, The frustration faded. The words that once felt like walls became windows, openings to a world bigger than he'd ever known. One night, as he finished the last chapter of The Hunger Games, he whispered the words that Katniss spoke, "May the odds be ever in your favor." And for the first time, Jake felt like they truly were. Because learning English wasn't just about words anymore. It was about breaking limits, the invisible ones we build around ourselves when we think something is too hard, too foreign, too impossible. Jake realized that every word he learned wasn't just a piece of language. It was a piece of freedom. By the fourth week, Jake had read more English than in his entire life. But something deeper was changing. It wasn't just his vocabulary. It was his mindset. English was no longer a subject he studied. It was becoming a voice he understood, even inside his head. One evening, as he sat in the library reading The Fault in Our Stars, a girl sitting across from him whispered, "That's one of my favorites." Jake looked up. She spoke in fluent English. He hesitated for a second, then answered, in English. His voice trembled, but he did it. They talked for 20 minutes. He stumbled over words, mixed tenses, but she smiled through it. It was the first real English conversation he'd ever had. When he left that night, his heart was racing. Not because of the girl, but because he'd finally used the language, not to pass a test, not for a challenge, but to connect. That night, he stayed awake, rewatching his favorite movie, Inception, this time without subtitles. He understood half of it, maybe more. But what shocked him was the feeling. It wasn't about getting every word. It was about feeling the story in a new way. For the first time, he realized that fluency wasn't perfection. It was comfort in the unknown. From that day, Jake built new habits. He switched his phone to English. He started thinking out loud when walking to class, practicing sentences from books. He began writing short summaries after finishing each novel, in English, and even posted a few on Reddit. To his surprise, people replied. Real people, from all over the world, correcting his grammar kindly, encouraging him. That feedback lit a fire inside him. By the end of week 5, he'd finished The Fault in Our Stars and moved to 1984 by George Orwell. It was harder, darker, but he wanted that challenge. The book's ideas made him think about freedom, expression, and how language could shape thought. It wasn't just reading anymore. It was transformation. One night, Ryan called him. "Yo, bookworm. How's the bet going? You giving up yet?" Jake laughed. "Giving up? I've already read 5 books, man." There was silence on the line. "Wait, seriously?" Ryan asked. "Yeah. And you owe me dinner for a week." But Jake's grin faded into a quiet smile. The money didn't matter. Somewhere between those pages, the bet had become something else. Because the truth was, Jake had started to fall in love with learning. He'd discovered that English wasn't a wall keeping him out of the world. It was a bridge leading him into it. When he closed 1984, he didn't feel like a student anymore. He felt like a traveler, moving through stories, exploring worlds built by words. The challenge had begun as a game, but it was turning into a journey toward something much bigger. And deep down, Jake knew this was only the beginning. Jake's progress was no longer something he could hide. By week 7, English had crept into every corner of his life. His phone, his playlists, even his dreams, all in English. He started waking up with random sentences in his head, like echoes from books and movies. Dream big. Fail better. Don't be afraid to start over. He didn't even know where they came from anymore, but they pushed him forward every morning. One day, his English teacher announced a small competition. Give a short speech about how reading changes you. The idea made Jake's stomach twist. Public speaking was terrifying enough in his native language. Doing it in English sounded insane. But something inside him whispered, try. He thought about the night he finished The Alchemist, about Katniss's I am not afraid, about how those words had shaped him. Maybe it was time to give something back. For a week, he wrote and rewrote his speech. He stood in front of the mirror every night, reading it aloud. He practiced rhythm, pronunciation, breathing. At first, he tripped on every other word. But with each repetition, his voice grew steadier. He even began to feel the language, the pauses, the power behind certain words, the way emotion hid between syllables. When the day came, Jake stood before the small crowd in the school hall. His palms were sweating, heart pounding, but he looked up and said clearly, "Reading taught me that every word has a purpose, even the ones I don't understand yet." The audience leaned in. He spoke about his first book, the confusion, the frustration, the long nights reading out loud. And then he said, "I used to think English was a wall. Now I know it's a door." When he finished, the room was silent for a moment, then filled with applause. His teacher smiled proudly. Ryan whistled from the back row. Jake laughed, a little embarrassed but glowing inside. He had done it. He hadn't just learned English. He had used it to inspire others. That night, he went to the library as usual. The librarian saw him and said, "You've changed." Jake smiled. "Maybe the books changed me." She nodded. "That's what they do." As he browsed the shelves, something strange happened. The English titles didn't look intimidating anymore. They looked inviting, like friends waiting to talk. He picked up The Great Gatsby, a book he'd once avoided because it looked too old. Now, it felt like the next step. Reading it was hard. The sentences were poetic, layered with meanings. But Jake no longer feared complexity. He took his time, savoring every metaphor, every rhythm. And somewhere between Gatsby's dream and his downfall, Jake saw himself, chasing a dream that once seemed unreachable, refusing to give up no matter how far it drifted. He started a small blog soon after, writing short reflections about the books he read, in English. He didn't expect anyone to read it, but people did. Comments began to appear. "This inspired me to start reading too." "I'm learning English. Your story helps." Jake smiled at the screen. He wasn't just a learner anymore. He was part of something bigger, a community of dreamers chasing words across borders. The $50 bet was long forgotten. But the challenge, that spark, had become something worth far more. Because through those pages, Jake hadn't just learned a new language. He had learned a new way to see himself, capable, curious, and unafraid. Months passed, and Jake's life no longer looked like the one he started with. English wasn't something he studied anymore. It was something he lived. He read on the bus, in cafes, even during lunch breaks. His shelves were now lined with books in English. Fahrenheit 451, The Catcher in the Rye, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a FCK. Asterisk, each one carried a piece of his transformation. Reading had turned into a quiet addiction, but the healthy kind, the kind that reshapes who you are from the inside out. One afternoon, Ryan dropped by his apartment and looked around. "Dude," he said, picking up a copy of The Great Gatsby, "you actually became a book guy." Jake laughed. "Guess so. Ryan flipped through the pages. So, was it worth it? Jake thought for a moment. He could have said yes because he won the bet. But that wasn't it. He looked up and said, "It was never about the money. It was about finding a voice I didn't know I had." By then, Jake's blog had grown beyond his imagination. Thousands of people followed it, readers, language learners, teachers. He began sharing short videos, talking about how books had taught him English in ways no classroom ever could. He spoke about how every story gave him a new accent, a new set of emotions, a new piece of courage. When you read in another language, he told his viewers, you stop translating. You start feeling. Soon, schools started inviting him to talk to students. The first time he stood in front of a crowd of teenagers staring at him with that same "I hate reading" look he once had, he smiled. He told them about the rainy day, the bet, the frustration, the breakthrough. He told them how each book had been like a small conversation with the world, and that the world only starts to speak back when you keep reading. Jake's English wasn't perfect. Sometimes he mixed tenses or mispronounced a word. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the spark in his voice. People didn't listen because he spoke like a native. They listened because he spoke with passion. He had become living proof that fluency isn't born from perfection. It's born from persistence. One evening, he returned to the library where it had all begun. The same smell of paper and dust, the same quiet hum of forgotten stories. He walked to the shelf where the alchemist sat and pulled it out. The cover was worn, corners folded, but it still carried the same promise. He opened it and read the line that had once changed everything. When you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it. Jake smiled. It had been true all along. The universe hadn't given him a shortcut. It had given him challenges, confusion, and pages full of unfamiliar words. But through those, it had built something stronger, resilience. He placed the book back on the shelf and whispered, "Thank you." As he turned to leave, he noticed a boy around 15 standing near the entrance, holding a library card and looking lost. Jake smiled and asked, "First time here?" The boy nodded. "Yeah. I want to get better at English, but I don't know where to start." Jake looked at him for a moment, then reached for the familiar book and handed it over. "Start here," he said. "It's tougher than it looks, but that's the point." The boy took it carefully, smiled, and walked away. Jake watched him go, realizing that the story had come full circle. Because the truth was simple, reading had taught Jake more than English. It had taught him patience, curiosity, and the courage to keep going even when every page felt impossible. And as he stepped out of the library that evening, he felt the rain begin to fall again, just like that first day. Only this time, he wasn't the same boy walking in. He was someone new, someone who had discovered that every book you open isn't just a story. It's a doorway to a version of yourself you haven't met yet. And all it takes to open it is one page.